Learn English through story. The secret beneath the floorboards. The old house stood in silence, its walls holding the weight of decades. Ivy crept up the stone facade, pressing against the wooden window frames as if trying to reclaim what time had abandoned. Eleanor Whitmore had inherited the estate after her grandmother's passing, a crumbling relic of a past she barely understood. She hadn't set foot in the house in years, not since childhood summers, filled with the scent of old books and the sound of the floorboards, whispering under careful steps. She was alone now, no family to call, no one to share the burden of memory. The solicitor had handed her the keys with a solemn nod, a gesture that felt heavier than it should have. The house smelled of dust and something else, something deeper, like the past had been left to rot beneath the weight of neglect. Eleanor wandered through the dimly lit rooms, running her fingers over the furniture draped in white sheets. Ghosts of the past lingered in every corner. The grandfather clock in the foyer had stopped at an uncertain hour, its hands frozen as if time had abandoned the house altogether. She climbed the creaking staircase to the master bedroom, where the scent of lavender still clung to the air, a faint echo of her grandmother's presence. That first night, sleep came uneasily. The wind rattled the windows, and the house settled with deep groans. Then came the sound of soft creaking, rhythmic and deliberate. She sat up, heart hammering, listening. It wasn't the wind, nor the settling of old wood. It was something else. The floorboards. She crept from her bed, bare feet sinking into the worn rug. The sound had come from the hallway, near the study. She followed it, each step a careful negotiation with the past. The study door stood ajar, revealing a room frozen in time, mahogany shelves lined with books, a leather chair by the fireplace, and the heavy oak desk where her grandmother once wrote letters by candlelight. But something was wrong. The rug beneath the desk was slightly askew. Eleanor hesitated before pulling it back, revealing the wooden floor beneath. And there, just barely visible in the dim light, was the outline of a small, square trapdoor. Her pulse quickened. She knelt, fingers tracing the edges, feeling for a latch. Dust clouded the air as she lifted the wooden panel, revealing a dark cavity beneath. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, lay an old, leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first page bore her grandmother's familiar handwriting. To whoever finds this, I hope you will understand the choices I made. I did what I had to do, and I pray that history does not repeat itself. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She turned the page, and the truth began to unfold. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she traced the inked words on the aged paper. The handwriting was precise, each letter carefully formed, yet there was an unmistakable weight to the words quietly hidden beneath the deliberate strokes of her grandmother's pen. She turned the page, and a date stared back at her, March 3rd, 1952. I never intended to keep secrets, but some truths are too dangerous to be known. If you are reading this, then you must be a part of this house, a part of its history. And you must understand, this is not just a house. It is a witness. It remembers everything. Eleanor swallowed hard. The wind outside howled, rattling the window panes as if the house itself was stirring in recognition. She glanced back at the trapdoor, its empty space gaping like an open wound. What else lay beneath the floorboards, hidden away in the quiet dark? She turned the page. It began with a visitor, a man whose name I cannot write. For names have power, and this one holds too much. He arrived on a night like this one, with the wind clawing at the windows and the fire burning low. I remember the way he looked at me, not like a stranger, but like someone who already knew me. And he did. He knew things about this house, about my family. He knew things no one should have known. Eleanor felt a chill slip down her spine. She had never known her grandmother to be anything other than a quiet, dignified woman, a keeper of traditions, a collector of old books and pressed flowers. But this was something else. She turned another page, and something fell from between the sheets of paper. A photograph. The edges were yellowed with age, the image faded. but she could still make out the figure of a woman standing in front of the house. Her grandmother, younger, perhaps in her 20s, wearing a dark dress that clung to her frame as if the wind had molded it to her body. And beside her, almost hidden by the shadows of the trees, stood a man. His face was blurred, whether by time or by intent, she couldn't tell. Beneath the photograph, in the same delicate script, was a single sentence. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Eleanor's breath caught. She looked back at the journal, but before she could read further, the house groaned a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the walls. She wasn't alone. The realization came slowly, sinking into her like cold water. The wind outside had died down, and yet she could still hear something. A soft creaking, like footsteps on old wood, coming from upstairs. She closed the journal, clutching it against her chest as she stood. Her mind raced. Was it just the house settling? A trick of her imagination, spurred on by the weight of the words she had just read? Or was there something else in this house? Something waiting, just beyond the reach of the light. Eleanor stepped carefully out of the study, her breath shallow. The hallway stretched before her, lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes followed her every move. The sound came again, a shift, a sigh, a whisper of movement. She turned toward the staircase. The second floor loomed above her, a dark expanse where shadows clung to the corners like forgotten memories. She hesitated at the first step, gripping the banister as if it could anchor her to the present. And then she saw it. At the top of the stairs, just beyond the reach of the dim light from the hallway, a figure stood, still, silent, watching. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. She blinked, and in that instant, the figure was gone. A trick of the light. It had to be. She forced herself to take another step, then another, until she reached the second-floor landing. The air here was different, thicker, heavier, as if the past still lingered in the dust that coated the wooden floors. She followed the sound, her feet barely making a whisper against the old boards. It led her down the hallway, past the locked doors of rooms that hadn't been opened in years. And then she saw it. A door, slightly ajar. Her grandmother's bedroom. The scent of lavender still clung to the air, faint but unmistakable. The bed was untouched, the curtains drawn. But something was different. The floor. The old wooden planks, worn smooth by time, had been disturbed. One of them, near the foot of the bed, was slightly raised. Eleanor hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly, she knelt, running her fingers along the edges of the board. It was loose. She took a deep breath and pried it open. Beneath it, nestled in the hollow space, was a small wooden box. She lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. The lid was carved with an intricate designer symbol she didn't recognize, worn down by time. Inside, wrapped in a delicate silk cloth, was another letter. Her grandmother's words stared back at her, inked onto fragile paper. Eleanor, if you have found this, then you are in danger. The past does not rest, and neither does he. Be careful. Trust no one. And whatever you do, do not open the door in the cellar. The floorboards creaked behind her. Eleanor froze. She wasn't alone. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The floorboards behind her had shifted just enough to make a sound, just enough to tell her that someone, or something, was there. Slowly, she turned her head, her hand still clutching the wooden box. The dim glow of the hallway light barely reached the room, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. But there was no one there. The air felt colder now, thick with the weight of something unseen. She forced herself to breathe, to think. It's just the house settling, just my nerves. But deep down, she didn't believe that. With shaking fingers, she unwrapped the silk cloth inside the box, revealing an old iron key. It was heavy, cold against her palm, its intricate design almost matching the carving on the box's lid. She knew what this meant. The cellar. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. Do not open the door in the cellar. But why? What was down there? What had been hidden beneath this house, waiting all these years? Eleanor pushed herself up from the floor, her movements careful, deliberate. The letter, the key, the journal, they were pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. But she had to. She made her way back down the hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound. The house felt different now, more alive, as if it had been waiting for her to uncover its secrets. By the time she reached the staircase, she could hear the wind again, pressing against the windows, whispering through the cracks in the old wooden walls. She gripped the banister, steadying herself as she descended. The cellar door was in the kitchen, just beyond the old stone hearth where her grandmother used to cook. She hadn't set foot down there in years, not since childhood, when she would dare herself to peek into the darkened stairwell before slamming the door shut and running away, laughing off her fear. But this time, it wasn't a game. The door stood before her now. Its age would warped with time. The iron handle rusted from years of disuse. A thick iron padlock hung from the latch, its keyhole an exact match for the key she now held in her trembling hand. Eleanor hesitated. Her grandmother had wanted this door to stay locked. She had warned her. You are in danger. But why? She had to know. With a deep breath, she slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, as if unwilling to turn. But then, with a soft click, it gave way. The padlock fell away, landing on the wooden floor with a dull thud. She pushed the door open. The darkness inside the cellar yawned before her, deep and absolute. A damp, musty smell drifted up from below, thick with the scent of old earth and something else. Something she couldn't quite place. She reached for the light switch on the wall, her fingers fumbling against the rough plaster. A dim bulb flickered to life at the top of the stairs, casting a sickly yellow glow down into the depths. The wooden steps groaned beneath her as she descended, her heart hammering in her chest. The cellar was just as she remembered, stone walls lined with wooden shelves, old jars of preserves stacked neatly in rows, the scent of time and dust pressing in around her. But then she saw it. A second door. It was built into the farthest wall, half hidden behind an old wooden shelving unit. Unlike the rest of the cellar, this door was newer, its wood unweathered, untouched by time. Eleanor swallowed hard. This was it. This was what her grandmother had been trying to keep buried. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the surface. The wood was cold beneath her touch. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a series of deep, deliberate scratches carved into the wood, as if someone had tried to claw their way through from the other side. A sudden gust of air rushed past her, carrying with it a faint whisper. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She wasn't imagining it. Something was here. And then, just as she turned to leave, she heard it. A knock, soft at first, then louder, coming from the other side of the door. Eleanor stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get out of this cellar, to lock the door and forget she had ever come down here. But she couldn't move, because now, beneath the knocking, she could hear something else. A voice, muffled, broken, a whisper that sent ice racing through her veins. Eleanor, her name, spoken from the other side of the door. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. She braced herself against the wall, struggling to think, to make sense of this. This was impossible. And then she saw it. The journal. It was still clutched in her hands, and as she looked down, as if compelled by something greater than herself, she flipped to the final page. There, written in her grandmother's careful, trembling hand, was one last message. If you hear the voice, whatever you do, do not answer. The knocking stopped. Silence pressed in around her, thick and suffocating. And then, the door creaked. The scratches on the wood seemed deeper now, almost as if they had appeared in real time, right before her eyes. The air grew heavier, colder, wrapping around her like unseen hands. She had to get out. She turned, nearly tripping over the uneven stone floor as she raced up the stairs. The dim light flickered wildly, shadows twisting and stretching across the walls. Just as she reached the top, the cellar door slammed shut. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she slammed her body against it, fumbling for the latch. Her fingers found the lock. She twisted it, threw the door open, and stumbled into the kitchen. The house was silent. The journal slipped from her grasp, landing open on the wooden floor. The pages fluttered wildly as if caught in an unseen wind. And there, scrawled in fresh ink beneath her grandmother's final words, words that hadn't been there before. "It knows you're here now." A slow, creeping terror curled around Eleanor's spine. She had opened a door that was never meant to be opened, and whatever had been waiting on the other side was no longer trapped. Eleanor stood in the dim light of the kitchen, her breath shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. The silence in the house was thick to thick, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting. The journal lay open on the floor, the ink on the last page gleaming as if it had just been written. "It knows you're here now." She swallowed, willing herself to move, to think. The cellar door still hung open behind her, its dark mouth yawning into the unknown. The cold draft seeped out, curling around her ankles like fingers trying to pull her back. She had to get out of this house. Now. She turned, grabbing her coat from the back of a chair, her keys from the counter. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to get into her car and drive away. Leave this cursed place to rot. But something stopped her. A sound, faint, almost imperceptible. A whisper slithering through the air like smoke. "Eleanor, don't go." The voice was soft, almost pleading. But it was wrong. It wasn't her grandmother's voice. It wasn't even entirely human. Her breath hitched. Her grip tightened around the keys. No, she wasn't going to listen. She bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock. The cold brass twisted beneath her fingers, slick with sweat. The moment she wrenched it open, a gust of wind slammed into her, howling like something enraged. The trees outside bent and swayed, their skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. Her car sat at the end of the long driveway, bathed in the glow of the porch light. Safety. She stepped outside, and then the door behind her slammed shut. Hard, like something inside the house didn't want her to leave. Eleanor jumped, heart hammering against her ribs. She turned slowly, staring at the closed door. The house loomed before her, its dark windows like empty eyes watching her every move. For a long moment, she just stood there, her breath a cloud of white in the cold night air. The silence stretched, and then, from somewhere inside deep within the walls of the house, a single, sharp knock. Once, twice, then silence. A chill slid down her spine. She had left that thing behind the door in the cellar, hadn't she? She should leave, get in her car, never come back. But her feet wouldn't move, because something inside her knew. It wasn't over. She had to go back. Not for herself, for her grandmother, for the truth. The night pressed in around her as she stepped back inside, the old floorboards groaning beneath her weight. The air was thick with the scent of dust, aged wood, and something else. Something rotten, hidden beneath the surface. She moved carefully, her fingers brushing the walls, grounding herself in the physical world. Her eyes flickered toward the cellar door now shut, as if nothing had ever happened. The house was silent, too silent. She bent down, picking up the journal again. The pages crinkled beneath her fingers. She scanned the last entry, searching for something, anything that might tell her what to do next. Her grandmother had left these warnings for a reason. She flipped back, earlier in the journal, and there, toward the middle of the book, she found something new. It does not live in the walls. It is the walls. It listens, it learns, it waits. Eleanor's breath came sharp and fast. And then, from somewhere deep inside the house, a door creaked open. Not the cellar. Upstairs. The master bedroom. Eleanor's grip tightened around the journal. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to run, to forget this place forever. But something inside her knew. It wouldn't let her. She had to finish this. With slow, careful steps, she climbed the staircase. The wooden banister was cold beneath her fingers. as if the house itself had been drained of warmth. The light at the top of the stairs flickered weakly, casting long, shivering shadows across the hallway. The master bedroom door stood open now, waiting for her. She stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of lavender so strong it made her head spin. The bed was untouched, the sheets smooth, undisturbed. But the closet door, the one that had always been locked, now stood slightly ajar. A deep, hollow darkness stretched beyond it, the air inside thick and unmoving. Eleanor swallowed. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the old wood, and a hand shot out. Pale, thin, grasping, fingers curled around her wrist, ice-cold and unyielding. She screamed, wrenching herself backward. The closet door slammed shut. The house shuddered. And then, silence. Eleanor gasped for air, her heart slamming against her ribs. The sensation of that cold grip still burned on her skin, a lingering echo of whatever had just touched her. She staggered back, her mind racing. She had to end this. Whatever her grandmother had tried to keep, buried whatever she had tried to protect. Her from it was awake now, and it wouldn't stop. Not until she uncovered the truth. Not until she knew. Not until she remembered. Eleanor stood in the center of the bedroom, her breath ragged, her mind caught between the past and the present. The closet door had slammed shut, but she could still feel it. The presence. Watching, waiting. Her grandmother's words burned in her mind. It does not live in the walls. It is the walls. It listens. It learns. It waits. She turned back to the journal, gripping it tightly. The pages whispered against her fingers, the inked words almost vibrating beneath her gaze. It will try to speak to you. It will try to know you. But you must not listen. You must not answer. Because the moment you do, it becomes real. Eleanor's hands trembled. The knocking in the cellar. The voice whispering her name. The thing that had reached for her from the closet. She had already answered. A sudden gust of wind slammed against the house, rattling the windows. The floor beneath her creaked not like settling wood, but like footsteps, slow, deliberate. Coming closer. She had to move. She bolted from the bedroom, nearly tripping over herself as she ran down the hallway. The portraits lining the walls seemed to shift in the dim light, their painted eyes following her. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the house was alive, breathing around her. As she reached the staircase, a shadow moved in the periphery of her vision. Not a trick of the light. Something was there, standing at the far end of the hallway. She didn't look. She couldn't. If she acknowledged it, if she gave it form, it would become real. She stumbled down the stairs, her heart beat a drum in her chest. The journal slipped from her grasp, landing with a thud at the bottom step. The pages fanned open, exposing more of her grandmother's frantic words. She snatched it up and ran. The front door. She reached for the handle, twisting it desperately. Locked. She hadn't locked it. Her own keys were still clutched in her fist. She fumbled with them, her vision blurring. The key slid into the lock. And then, a voice, right behind her. "You can't leave, Eleanor." She froze. The air around her turned ice-cold, wrapping around her throat, pressing against her skin. It was right behind her, close enough to touch, close enough to breathe. A sharp, metallic scent filled her nose like rust, like blood. Slowly, she turned her head and saw it. A shape, not quite human. A distortion in the air, shifting, flickering like something trying to take form but unable to hold it. Its face. Oh, God. It had no face. Just a hollow, stretching absence, like a void in the shape of a person. And it was smiling. Without a mouth, without eyes. Just the impression of a grin. A voice, slithering from nowhere, from everywhere. "You found me." Eleanor's scream caught in her throat. She slammed the key forward, twisting. The lock clicked. She yanked the door open, the night air crashing into her like a tidal wave. But as she stepped forward, something grabbed her ankle. Ice-cold fingers, dragging her back. No, no, no. She kicked, struggling, twisting. And then, The voice whispered again. You can't leave. You're part of it now. Pain exploded in her skull as she was pulled backward, back into the house. The door slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. Eleanor woke with a start. Her head ached. The air was damp, heavy. She was on the floor. The house was silent. No wind, no whispers. Just an unbearable stillness. She pushed herself up, blinking against the darkness. The only light came from the flickering kitchen bulb, casting long shadows across the walls. She reached for the journal, her fingers stiff and numb. The pages had changed. Before, her grandmother's words had been careful, controlled. Now, the ink was frantic, smeared. Some of the words were scratched out, rewritten, over and over again. A single phrase, repeating, filling the entire page. It sees me. It sees me. It sees me. It sees me. A choked sob slipped from Eleanor's lips. And then, the final entry. Words that hadn't been there before. I tried to warn you, but it was never about keeping you away, was it? It was about bringing you back. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She flipped the page. More ink, more words. But this time, they weren't in her grandmother's handwriting. They were hers. I remember now. The journal slipped from her hands. Memories flooded her mind, images crashing over her like waves. She had been here before. She had lived in this house as a child. She had played in the halls, laughed under this very roof. And she had seen something. Something no one else had. Something she wasn't supposed to remember. A hidden door. Not the one in the cellar. A different one. A third door. Buried beneath the floorboards. Her hand shook as she scrambled toward the study. The rug, the one that had always been there. She ripped it back. The floorboards beneath were slightly warped, uneven. She dug her nails into the wood, prying it open. And then, a gaping hole. A staircase descending into blackness. Not a cellar. Something deeper. Something older. Something waiting. Eleanor's breath came in sharp gasps. She remembered now. She had seen this door before. She had gone down those stairs before. And she had never come back. Not really. A slow, creeping terror curled around her. She had never left this house. She had been here all along. She looked down at her hands. They were fading. Like the figure she had seen in the hallway. Like the thing behind the closet door. She was part of the house now. She always had been. And the house was hungry. The final words in the journal burned in her mind. It does not live in the walls. It is the walls. It listens. It learns. It waits. And now it had her. Forever. Moral. Some doors should never be opened. Some secrets should remain buried. Because once you uncover them, once you see the truth, you can never unsee it.